know people will be coming in the next few minutes or so, but we're going to get started. So this is the grammar of graphics, designing and transforming data. I'm Sandhya Kambhampati. I'm an OpenNews fellow at Corrective in Berlin, Germany.
And my name is Christine Zhang. I'm also an OpenNews fellow based at the Los Angeles Times in California.
And previously, I worked at the Chronicle of Higher Education as a database reporter in Washington, D.C., doing higher education data reporting. Have a background in journalism and statistics.
And I also previously lived in Washington, D.C., but I do not have a background in journalism. I do have a background in statistics. I was working as a data analyst at the Brookings Institution, which is a think tank that does work specifically for me about the global economy and development.
So if you'd like to follow along, we've created a bit.ly link. It's bit.ly/ggplot2 workshop. Just to start, how many of you have used R before, as a show of hands? Okay. How many of you know what R is? Okay, all right. So we're going to go through what the basics of R is, just a quick overview. R is a language and environment for statistical computing and graphics.
Oh, hold on.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Oh. Yeah, when you click on the link, it'll take you to a web page, and what you can do is download all of the files, download it as a zip or something, and open up the file with the HTML extension, which will open up this presentation in your web browser.
Okay. Sorry about that. You guys good on the? Okay. So R is used for statistical computing and graphics, and ggplot2 is a data visualization package for R. It's developed by Hadley Wickham, and it, as you can see by the name of our talk, Grammar of Graphics, the two G's, one is a grammar and the other is graphics. It provides a organizing philosophy for building graphs and a structured approach to graphing. And so Christine's going to explain more about that philosophy.
Right. So just as literary grammar in languages provides a structural framework for writing sentences and speaking, the grammar of graphics, we would like to think, provides an organizing structure for visualizing data. And so here you can see the fundamental elements of every ggplot2 graphic. And really, these are the fundamental building blocks of every, or I would say most, data visualizations that you would make. Like first, you want to specify the data that you're using. What is the raw data that you want to be put on the graph? Second are aesthetics, like mapping. Which variable, if you have two axes, which one do you want to be on the horizontal x-axis, and which one do you want to be on the vertical y-axis? Do you want the color, the size, or the position to be related to some other variable, or do you want, all the colors to be blue, things like that? Then third, geometries. So these are, what are the geometric shapes that you want the data to be represented by? Do you want them to be dots, points, curves, lines, bars? We'll go through all that later. And finally, the statistical transformations that you make for the data.
So I realize that a lot of you don't have your laptops right now with you, in front of you, but when you go home, or if you're interested in installing ggplot2, it's very simple. Once you have the most recent version of R first, then you can just do install packages ggplot2 and load the library ggplot2 using the code that we have put here. So for this presentation, we're going to go through a simple data set, the US states data, that comes in ggplot2. And so what we've done here is basically just taken the data and transformed it into a tabular format so that we can just see what data we're looking at right now. This is not ggplot2 code. It's actually just R code that we have written here. And it just is saying that you load this data and name the column names and bring in the data in a tabular format. So the data we're going to be looking at is U.S. Census Bureau data, population, income, illiteracy, life expectancy, murder, and high school graduation rates. We won't be looking at all of them, but those are some of the data sets that are in here. So Christine is going to walk you through how to plot your data in QuickPlot.
Right. So if you want to quickly just draw one variable against the other without writing too much code, ggplot2 has a nice feature called qplot, which stands for quick plot. So this one line of code here, if you copy and paste it into R and you run it, it will create a scatter plot of income against life expectancy. And then on the next slide, you can even add a title by specifying main. So like with just one line of code, you can create this simple graph.
So now we're going to go through the basic features of ggplot2. We're going to go through scatter plots, line graphs, and bar graphs. But before we start, does anyone have any questions so far? Okay. So for a scatter plot, so I'm going to walk you through, for the first example, I'll walk you through each line of code. So we will start by saying ggplot to specify to R that you're using ggplot. And data equals states data, so that's our data set that we're pointing to. Aesthetics is AES, and that's telling ggplot what the X and Y axis are going to be. So X is income and Y is, yes?
Sorry, what is the file format for the dataset? Is it a JSON file or a CSV file?
It is actually preloaded in ggplot2, so you just have to, this data set that we're using for this example is already in ggplot2. It's already in the package.
The format is an R data file. So if you want it to become a CSV file, you can export it to CSV, but it's a native file to R that can be loaded from within the package itself. You can also import CSV files or other types of files into R. Yeah.
Okay, and so to continue with the ggplot scatter plot, you would, after aesthetics, you would add in geom point, so that's saying geometry, and you're asking it to put points on the graph. And then we're going to give it a title, income versus life expectancy, because we want to see what that data looks like. So that would produce this chart.
Yes, and you'll notice this is actually the same exact graph as the qplot one with many more lines of code, but this is utilizing the full grammar of graphics, like first the data, then the aesthetics, then the geometry and stuff. And it's more powerful, as you'll see later on in the presentation. Yeah.
And so another thing that I want to mention is that with ggplot, it actually follows a pattern of layers. So you start with the data and aesthetics, geom point, and so now we want to look at, we want to change this graph that I've shown before from 3,000 at the x-axis to 1,000, to start at 1,000. So you would change that to scale continuous 1,000. And that's basically telling ggplot to start the scale at 1,000. And that's the graph that it produces. Now, if we want to show a break every 1,000, let's say you don't want to show this 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, you'd like to see every 1,000 interval. You would just add another layer to ggplot2, and so you would add scale breaks, and then add the scale y continuous to label the y-axis. And that's what that graph looks like. is everyone good at following along? I know it's a lot of code to go through, but yeah. Okay. Now, and if you're interested in, let's say you see this graph and it's just black and white, and you wonder, okay, I would like to see what colors in this data set, and actually see these points differently. So what you can do is add in the aesthetics portion of ggplot, color equals states. So you're telling ggplot2 to plot the color as states. So this is what that graph would look like. And the feature of color actually produces the legend on the side automatically. But as you can see, labeling 50 different states, 50 different colors is a bit much. So you probably wouldn't want to use this graph for a data visualization.
Yeah. Okay, so that was scatter plots. Now the second type of graph is a line graph. So a line, just like a scatter, is a type of geometry. So in order to create a line graph, we just add another layer called geom line. So once we specify that element, that creates a line that connects all of the points. So as you can see, this is very zigzagged. Later on, if we have time, I'll show you how you can draw a fitted line or a curve rather than a simple connecting segment. Now, Sandhya showed you how to make each point colored according to which state it came from. But what if you wanted specific colors or specific sizes? So what if you wanted the points to be bigger and red and the lines to be blue? Because now we're just picking colors and sizes instead of mapping them to any particular variable, we can add them into the geometry portion of the code. So we add our red to point and 5 pixels for 5, and we add blue to line. And this is what it shows. It's kind of hard to see here, but the order of the code is actually pretty important because ggplot layers things on top of each other. Recall that I added the points first, and then I added the lines on top of the points. But what if you wanted the points to be on top of the lines? In order to do that, all you have to do is reverse it. So instead of adding the geom point element first, you add the geom line element first. And then just for fun, I added like dashed lines instead of solid lines. And I made squares, which are shape equals 15, instead of circles for the points. And at the end of the presentation, we have some resources that will tell you which features are which and which numerical code corresponds to which type of shape. So this will create this. It'll add squares, and I promise you, they are definitely on top of the lines and not underneath, even if it's hard to see.
Okay, so now that we've gone through scatter plots and line graphs, we're going to go through bar graphs. So to simplify things, rather than using all 50 states, we've chosen to just go with 3 states, California, New York, and Texas. And so basically what this line of code says is create this 3 states file and just use this data set, these data. So now we're going to use that data set in the bar graph. So again, it's ggplot, data equals 3 states. The aesthetics is still states equals, aesthetics x equals states, and y equals population. And as you saw before, it was geom point for the scatter plot, and for the line graph, it was geom line. For the bar graph, it's geom bar. So the difference with geom bar, geom line, and geom plot is that, geom point, sorry, is that geom bar has stat identity. And this is something that you need to add in. And this is basically saying that this is the total population that we're looking for. Now, if you wrote stat equals mean, you would be looking for the average population. There's other things you can put in there, but just for our purposes, we've just chosen identity. And so this is what that graph would look like. It's a very, very basic bar chart.
Yeah. California is the most populous state out of the three, which
Yep.
I could have told you, but it's good to verify on this data too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So now, what if we want to take this graph that we've just looked at and make it a transparent background, because we don't want the background that it has. So again, it's just adding one more line of code. You would add theme and say element blank, so a blank transparent screen. Background, sorry. And this is what that graph would look like.
Okay, another type of bar graph is a stacked bar graph, which not only puts the data next to each other, but also stacks the bars on top of each other. So to do this, we're going to create a category. We'll divide the data into two parts. Part one will be either if the state is California or New York, and part two will be if the state is Texas. So now we have two states in the California, New York category, and one state, Texas, in the Texas category. So now the code to create a stacked bar graph. We're going to go through this because it's a little bit different from the other code that was shown. So you'll notice, first of all, that I specified X to be equal to category, since I'm dividing the data into two categories. I didn't specify a Y element, and we'll see what happens on the next slide. I want the bar to be filled according to states. Like, I want the color of the bar to be which state the bar is. So I put that into the aesthetics element, fill equals states. Again, it's geom bar, and this time, because I want it to be stacked on top of each other, I will put position equals stack. So that makes sure the states are stacked according to the category. So we'll see on the next slide that this is what that looks like. Again, the legend is created automatically, which is a nice feature. And it's not super interesting, but you'll notice on the y-axis, because I didn't specify a y variable, it just by default plots the count. Well, we already know that there's two states in the first category, California and New York, and one state in the second category, Texas. So, this just tells us that there are three states in our entire data set. So let's put a variable on the y-axis to make things a little bit more interesting. Let's put illiteracy on the y-axis. So I want to see, what illiteracy rate, the percentage of the population that is illiterate. I want to see how that compares between the two categories. So now I've specified a y element. And as Sandhya mentioned, with bar graphs, when a y-axis variable is specified, I must also specify a statistical transformation. So I actually don't want to make any statistical transformations. I just want to plot the illiteracy rate for the two categories. So again, that's stack equals identity. And here, it's much more interesting, or at least it tells some sort of story. I can see that California and New York taken together have an illiteracy rate of about 2.5%, and Texas alone has an illiteracy rate of a little bit over 2%. So, if I were to tell a story, I would say that Texas by itself has an illiteracy rate of almost as much as the other two states put together. So, what is going on there? Keep in mind that this is an old data set and just an example. I think it's from 1975. So, maybe the reading and writing capabilities of Texas have improved since then, or or things might just be different. But it's still an interesting story to explore nonetheless.
So before we head on to more advanced features, does anyone have any questions about the bar graph, the scatter plot, or the line graph? Okay. All right. Well then, we're going to go on to some of these advanced features of ggplot2. So we're going to talk about faceting, fitted lines, and text labels. Does anyone know what faceting is by chance? Okay, yes? Oh, okay, okay, all right. That's okay, because that's why you're here, to learn what faceting is, and I'm here to teach you. So faceting allows you to split up your data by one or two variables. And so we're gonna go through just one of the faceting features, facet grid. And facet grid places one or two variables in either vertical or horizontal directions. So basically, if we wanted to look at population under 2 million, I know it says here 2,000, in thousands, so 2 million. So we wanted to just look at population under 2,000 and population above 2,000 for states. So basically, you would just load the data in using this line of code. And with ggplot, it's again the same, data equals states.data. The aesthetics would be the income on the x-axis and life expectancy on the y-axis, and geom point as the points. And we're going to add this facet grid so that it's separated the population under 2,000 and above 2,000. And so this is what that graph is going to look like. So that initial code that we actually had seen at the beginning, scatter plot that I'd shown you, we just added that one line facet grid, and it created two separate graphs. So it's just that simple. Now, what if we want to draw a fitted line? Christine will walk you through that.
Yeah, so before we had just drawn a zigzag line to connect the points, but usually people are interested, if I have life expectancy and income, I'm interested in a fitted curve through these points. What's the, if we want, what's the relationship between these two variables? Can we fit some sort of linear model on it? And so in order to do this, a fitted curve is a statistical transformation. So I have to add a statistics element to my existing code. This particular one is fitting a smooth line, so it's called stat smooth. And the default is to fit a smoothed curve. So as you can see, it's a very weird upside down U-shaped curve because of that one data point at the very right that skews the entire data. But actually maybe it doesn't actually look like that. Maybe instead of drawing a curved line, I want to draw the best fit straight line. So in order to do this, as I mentioned, it's a linear model. So I specify method equals LM to make sure that the curve is not curved at all, but rather straight. And the next graph shows what that looks like. And just so you know, the gray bars are the confidence intervals around the prediction points.
Okay, so before we go on, if you're wondering, doing this as an exploratory graph, and you see this point down here, and you might wonder, okay, well, what is that point, and how can I know what each of these are? There's no labels. So if you would like to label your data, we will show you how to do that. So that's geom text. So again, you're taking ggplot, adding the first line of data, aesthetics, income, and life expectancy, the same as before, but you're just adding geom text, and we're saying to label it as states. Now, it would come out like this. So this is probably something you wouldn't want to run, I guess, in print or in online. I think it's more of an exploratory graph. As you can see, there's clusters of states, and you can barely read some of them. But that point out on the side was Alaska. So I think if you were interested in understanding your data more, this is very useful. So does anyone have any questions about these three features right now? Yes?
Is there a way to calculate population rate, or is it is there a Is there a way to calculate a correlation rate using this tool, or is it more a job for another part of our software?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you can calculate the correlation using R itself, and you can put that number onto the ggplot point. But I think ggplot itself doesn't, like, it does calculate it in the background, but the primary function is to fit the line visually. Yeah.
Right. So just to recap now, as we talked about earlier, the philosophy of ggplot2 relies on a few basic elements. Data, the raw data you want to plot. So that's the first line that we've shown in each graph. Aesthetics, including mapping which variables on the x-axis or the y-axis.
Geometries, geometric shapes that represent the data. And finally, statistical transformations. And so I think this is helpful when thinking about what type of data you want to visualize and how to visualize it, and different types of features you want to add on to the data. It's really helpful to think about it in these 4 categories. Not only because it helps you when you write code in ggplot2, but it also forces you to think about your data and what exactly you want to visualize and how you want to structure it.
And it helps you also think about the different layers that are involved in your data. So you'll see that there's, if you are concerned more about fixing the aesthetics of the data or aesthetics of your graph, you can work more on that or add more features to that, or really spend more time on doing the statistical transformations using ggplot2. So here's a few resources we've included in our slide. We've also included this in our bit.ly link. So, I mean, if you'd like to use these, they're great. The cheat sheet, I actually have that printed out. I highly recommend that cheat sheet. And there are some other data journalists using R and have made this resources for doing data journalism website, and it's really great. So, does anyone else have any questions? The bit.ly link is here. You can reach out to us on Twitter, and we're happy to help anyone with any R questions you may have. Yeah?
Thanks.
Thank you.